Hey there, guys. All right, today we are on to the Great War Week 159. Very short title today. Despair Everywhere. I think this is the shortest title for the series so far. Before I dive in, make sure you go and check out the links in the description box below. I would love if you joined the Discord and followed me over at Twitch. How far away are we from the Russians having their Revolution 2.0? When are we getting down and dirty? Yeah, really got nothing to, a very short title, so let's just dive in.
For 3 years, the war has raged, still with no end in sight. And as it has rolled on, and the death toll climbed ever higher, and as the offensives have grown larger and bloodier, like none ever seen before on Earth, something else has grown and grown. Despair.
I'm curious. I'm sure I've reacted to a video like it before. I'm curious, or at least a video that may have mentioned it. I'm curious but I'm forgetting, where the World War I is on the ranking of like total percentage of world population killed out of wars, cause right, like the Punic War was pretty high, I think. Feel like maybe some of the Persian wars, Achaemenid wars may have been. The Mongolians are definitely up there. Anyways. I mean, the 30 Years' War was fucking high. I think I've mentioned this before. If I'm remembering right, that is probably still Germany's highest. Unless it's World War II. It's either, I think, 30 Years' War or World War II.
I'm Indy Nidell. Welcome to the Great War. Last week, a huge British
updated map. I like this map a lot. This is a sexy map.
French offensive, what would be known as the Battle of Passchendaele or the Third Battle of Ypres, began in Belgium. The Romanians and Russians beat the Germans and Austrians in Romania, but the Russian army was in full retreat on the Eastern Front. We also saw a mutiny in the German Navy. Here's what followed. There was new action this week in Romania as the Battle of Marășești got going. German Field Marshal August von Mackensen began the offensive August 6th. That same day, units of the Russian Fourth Army were to begin to leave their positions and be replaced by Romanian troops. On the 7th, Mackensen took 3,000 prisoners, and the following day, the Russo-Romanian forces began to pull back. And the week ended with Mackensen crossing the Suritsa River. Also in Romania this week, the Second Battle of Oltuz began. This was another Central Powers attack on the Oltuz Valley on a 7-kilometer front, with the Romanians greatly outnumbered. Behind the Romanian lines lay the rear of the Russian and Romanian fronts, so a defeat here could have serious consequences. Although the Romanians initially resisted the Austro-German assault, by the end of the week they had been forced to move to new defensive lines and were exhausted. They were also having trouble with reinforcements because of the concurrent fighting at Marășești. There is something I really have to say now about the Battle of Marășești. This was not a little skirmish. This was a major month-long battle involving 500,000 soldiers.
God damn.
I would very much like to be able to talk more about the tactics and the thinking behind the battle, but I just don't have the source material. Maybe there's some good stuff in Romanian, but I don't know. So I apologize for not being able to go into real detail into it, and if someone has good source material, please let us know, and maybe we can cover the battle more during Out of the Trenches or something. Anyhow, the Russians were going to be pulled away to defend their own front, where they were looking for somewhere to push westward. On the 8th, they attacked the Austrians at Kovel and failed to take it, but this was nothing compared to what else was going on in that whole sector south of the Pripyat marshes. 863,000 Russians were facing just under 500,000 Austrians. I read in Martin Gilbert's The First World War that the Austrians were understandably alarmed, but German General Max Hoffmann, Chief of Staff on the Eastern Front, and some say the true mastermind behind the German victory at Tannenberg, and one of the more interesting characters of the war, thought that was a typical failure of Austrian nerve, and they were a mouthful of sensitive teeth. Every time the wind blows, there's a toothache.
Hold on. Now, if every time the wind blows, your teeth are hurting, you should get that checked out, okay? That could mean you have a cavity, all right? Stay healthy.
German troops now reinforce them as they had last year. In
Take
fact,
care of your
6
teeth. You
divisions
need
have been
them.
pulled off the Western Front in July, even though the Germans knew the Allies were preparing a new offensive there. Kind of shows how German Quartermaster General Erich Ludendorff sort of dismissed the Western Allies in favor of winning the war in the East. Anyhow, massive Russian assaults followed into withering machine gun and artillery fire, but there was no breakthrough. The Austrian lines held, and the Russians took tens of thousands of casualties. And at home in Petrograd, the collapse of Russia's Kerensky offensive 3 weeks ago and the subsequent retreat had destroyed a lot of the confidence and all of the momentum that Russia's provisional government had built up since the February Revolution. And people are abandoning its centrist position in droves. The Bolsheviks on the left, who call for peace, bread, and land, begin to seriously attract new followers in spite of their treasonous activity of just a few weeks ago. On the right come more and more calls for the return of the Tsar or some powerful authority figure. The new commander of the army, Lav Kornilov, repeatedly makes statements critical of the provisional government, even as the men in his army desert in droves, undeterred by his liberal use of the death penalty in the field, which is supposed to increase loyalty among the troops, but will have the opposite effect, destroying
No, it increases fear, but here's the thing. If they start to hate you more than they fear you, the fear ain't gonna work, right? Like, simple, I think that's, what's the Machiavelli? Yeah, he wrote the thing I'm thinking of.
Morale even further. Low morale is also an issue among the British on the Western Front after the first week of their Flanders offensive. The rain finally stopped on August 6th to reveal a battlefield pretty much in name only. The earth was blown up and covered with barbed wire, dead bodies, and equipment. The drainage system was completely overwhelmed and the land was totally flooded. The former trenches were no longer recognizable as such, although the Germans' concrete blockhouses still dotted the landscape relatively unharmed. To get to the front lines, the soldiers had to traverse a network of duckboards laid on the swampy ground. Moving along these narrow, precarious wooden pathways became one of the enduring memories of the battle for British and Imperial soldiers. Conveyor belts of fear and terror that took them from the relative safety of the rear lines all the way to the front, where there was no possibility of sleep or rest, only uncertainty and inevitably sheer terror. The rain had prevented Sir Hugh Gough from sending his Fifth Army to capture the objectives he had failed to take July 31st, but he was determined, if nothing. At a meeting on the 7th, it was decided that the Second Corps would try to advance within the next few days, depending on the condition of the ground. 2 divisions would make the assault, the 18th towards Inverness Copse and Glencorse Wood, and the 25th into the village of Westhook. Moving the big guns up to support this was a Herculean effort, and these 2 divisions had already been at the front for most of a week, wet and exhausted. There was even almost a shortage of food and water because of the logistical nightmare of bringing everything up from the very rear. A small army of engineers and the Chinese Labor Corps built shelters and dugouts, maintained pumping stations and water tanks, filled shell holes, and so forth. They would have also worked on salvaging the ditched tanks, but the weather made that impossible. Bear in mind that by the end of this week, the combined French and British casualties were over 68,000 for the battle. The attack finally went off on August 10th, aimed at knocking out, capturing, or driving away the German field artillery. 25th Division managed to take Westhook and hold it against fierce counterattacks. So this attack had limited success, but it was still costly. The weather had conspired to prevent real artillery support. Gough would attack again next week.
Of course
the mood among the British troops was as dark as the weather, though it was kind of the opposite among the Germans there. The major offensive that had been prepared with the utmost care for months, and which was carried out with unprecedented force, with double superiority in infantry and triple superiority in artillery, had failed utterly. And those opposed to British Commander-in-Chief Sir Douglas Haig's offensive were active this week. There was a conference in London on the 8th where Prime Minister David Lloyd George tried to get approval for an alternate plan to get off the Western Front and send 12 British divisions and loads of heavy guns to Italy to attack on that front. Lloyd George pointed out that the go-ahead for the Flanders offensive, now nearly 2 weeks old, had been given with the understanding that it would quickly lead to clear results, and that hadn't happened. British Chief of Staff Willie Robertson, who supported Haig, was well aware that Lloyd George had a valid argument and wrote to Haig, "The powers that be are beginning to get a little uneasy in regard to the situation. The casualties are mounting up, and the ministers will persist in asking whether a loss of, say, 300,000 men
Of say, get the what?
will lead to a really great result, because if not, we ought to be content with something less than we are doing now." I just want to anachronistically point out that 300,000 men is getting close to the number of British soldiers that died in total in the Second World War. Just saying. And there was one notable individual.
Was it really only 300,000? Now, when we look at the British number, is that like British soldiers, or are we talking British Imperial soldiers? Because I can't remember
British death.
which one, how they
At
get
Scapa
lumped in
Flow, back
together.
on August 2nd, British Squadron Commander Edwin Dunning took off from an airfield and landed his plane on the aircraft carrier Furious. This was a first, since before, planes could take off from the carriers but couldn't land on deck and had to be winched aboard from barges. Dunning did it again 5 days later, but was killed during a third attempt on August 7th when his plane went over the side and into the sea.
Oof.
And one note to end the week. On the 5th, Richard von Kuhlmann becomes the new German foreign minister, replacing Arthur Zimmermann, the author of the infamous Zimmermann Telegram. And the week ends with mud and despair in Belgium, Russian despair in the east and at home, and a new German offensive in Romania. It just had to happen, right? Despair. 3 years of stalemate in the West under endless artillery and now oceans of mud. Last week, a mutiny in the German ranks. Earlier this summer, a general mutiny in the French army. And now, Russian soldiers unwilling to fight, even in the face of execution. On all battlefronts, we see it more and more. No hope at all left, but what can you do? You go on hour by hour, one day at a time, until you win, you break, or you die. If you lost track of...
And that was Despair Everywhere. Fitting title, looking back on it now. The Great War, week 159. Nothing to add here at the end. I hope you guys enjoyed. Remember to hit that like button and subscribe for more. And I will see you guys in the next video. Peace.